Hello and welcome to another episode of the MSL Insider. Today we have an amazing guest who's an MSL in the field, and I'm going to hand it off right to her. I know time is of the essence, so I would love to hear a little bit about your background, if you could introduce yourself, and a little bit about what people should know about you before we hop in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I do just want to say at the beginning that the views expressed here today are my own and not representative of the company. But to introduce myself, my name is Krysia Lesniak. I'm a pharmacist by training. I got my PharmD and MBA from the University of Rhode Island before pursuing a one-year postdoc fellowship with Takeda, and have stayed on. I'm currently working as a senior MSL for Takeda. So I was fortunate to get hired initially at the end of my fellowship as a full-time MSL, and then just was recently promoted. So I took this role. I moved out to the Northwest. So I'm from Maine originally. I spent the year post-grad in Boston, and then decided to switch up the territories and have moved out to Seattle. I've been here coming up on 2 years and have absolutely loved it.
Amazing. And so what inspired you to pursue the route of taking a postdoctoral fellowship, not taking, but like applying to and getting selected, to doing a postdoctoral fellowship, and then later an MSL? I'd love to hear a little bit about like what inspired you to go on this journey.
Absolutely. So I kind of want to take a step back. I think my journey looks a little too linear and kind of might underestimate anything else that I had in the route there. But I went into a 06 program out of high school, immediately started pharmacy school, kind of had that set as my path. Then took on a one-year postdoc fellowship in U.S. medical and field medical, and then ended up in the MSL role. Throughout pharmacy school, that this was what I wanted to do, but it really was in getting involved in different pharmacy organizations, having different work experiences, that I really started to get a better understanding of where my skills aligned. So I started out, I was working in community pharmacy settings, ambulatory care pharmacy settings, and it was through the latter that I actually kind of met my first MSL and started to see drug reps and the industry side of things. So I was working alongside PCPs in their office, helping to manage patients with chronic conditions, and the MSLs and some sales reps would drop by, kind of got to network with them a little bit, and then started attending some of their educational programs. And that's where I really saw the value that MSLs provide. I saw that they were disease state experts on their products, and they're really giving information to these HCPs that helped them inform decision-making for their patients. So I was then really fortunate to gain a mentor who was and still is an MSL, through involvement in one of my pharmacy organizations. He was instrumental in connecting me with his colleagues, getting a better understanding of fellowship offerings, and really solidified my interest in pursuing a fellowship, with the end goal being the MSL role.
And for those who are unfamiliar, like we have a lot of students who listen to our podcast and a lot of aspiring MSLs. And so could you explain a little bit about what a postdoctoral fellowship entails? Like, what is it exactly? And what sort of value does it provide for those aspiring to enter medical affairs? I also want to tack on a little bit of addition to that question. If you can differentiate between a fellowship and a residency for those people who are listening who are like, wait, what's the actual difference?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'll start with the second part. I think that's often a decision that pharmacy students at the end of their academic journey are often faced with, deciding kind of what route to go. So I think the residency route is really the post-grad training for more of those clinical opportunities, and a fellowship is post-grad training for more of the biopharmaceutical industry, more of a career in those different industry roles. So a lot of students have come to me, they've had interest in the MSL role, but really feel passionate right now about clinical care. And I always encourage them to kind of align with their passions right then. I think a lot of value can come from having clinical experience and then entering into an MSL role. So there's certainly no reason to feel like you need to pursue a fellowship just to get into the MSL role from the get-go. If you have current passions more aligned with clinical, the fellowships are a fantastic opportunity. They really immerse a recent graduate in the biopharmaceutical industry, prepare them for a career there, really expose them to a lot of the different functions, a lot of the roles that we probably didn't even know when we were in pharmacy school that exist for pharmacists. So they're often 1 or 2 year programs. They are affiliated with academic institutions or they're independent, but the former really gives students or the fellows an opportunity to mentor other students at the pharmacy school and also gain kind of an academic teaching component. They can be rotational in different areas of one functional area or a number of them. Also can be project-based. You might stick to more like one therapeutic area, or you might kind of bounce around. But really just a great immersive learning experience for recent graduates to get their foot in the door in the industry.
Great. Yeah. And I would echo the same sentiment. It's like for students, follow what you're most interested in right now, because, that could shift and change. And now having been in my career for quite a few years, it's like what I thought I would do initially with I pursued a residency first. I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely. I'm going to do clinical care. And now I'm in industry. So you just never really know where the path will lead. So follow exactly as you said, what you're interested in right now, and you can always make the shift. Nothing is, ever set in stone.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So with your postdoctoral fellowship, you mentioned that there was quite a bit of a field component. So would love to talk a little bit about, what in your fellowship helped prepare you for your role as an MSL today or as a senior MSL with your promotion. And were there any specific experiences that helped ease your transition? Was it, having, great mentorship? Was it, being able to interface with other MSLs on your team? What really, changed the game for you?
Yeah, so all the above. I'll definitely highlight the impact of the field medical component, as you mentioned, but also want to share that the other medical rotations that I had were also really fundamental in giving me a better understanding today of how my MSL role fits into the broader medical unit and even other functions. So I had other rotations in medical strategy. So really saw the development of the medical plan, of listening imperatives, and the exact kind of strategy that I now go out into the field with. And so that was really cool to see. Also development of advisory boards, even starting to see kind of the HCP KOL relations then. And then also worked in value and evidence generation and also helped to create materials for the payer-facing field medical team. So that was really interesting as well, just seeing slightly different scope that they have in talking to payers versus more of the healthcare professionals. And then as for the field medical component, I was very fortunate. The time really lined up and I was able to join some new hires in their scientific training. So I was completely field certified by the time I got hired on as an MSL. And was really able to hit the ground running. But also before then, when I did ride-alongs or went to conferences, I thought that scientific training helped prepare me and make all of those experiences a lot more valuable and gave me a bigger area to contribute, having had the scientific background. And then our team was pretty lean while I was going through my fellowship. So that also afforded me a lot of opportunities. I led a number of different national conferences, a lot of journal clubs. I helped with field medical tactical plans and did a number of ride-alongs. It was very immersive. I didn't manage my own territory, but I feel like I saw pretty much the full scope of the MSL role in my fellowship.
Amazing. And looking back, at your fellowship experience, is there anything that you wish you would have done differently, especially as it pertains to, preparing for your role now?
I think my advice would extend to any fellowship, but it's really a time of learning. And there's probably not going to be another opportunity in your career to kind of take these side projects in different functional areas and just kind of cross the bounds of one specific role that you would have after fellowship. So there's anything of interest while you're going through the program, I think it would be important to seek that out. And even if it's just informational interviews with other members of other teams, I think you can also reach out and then from there see if there are any projects to help with. But I work a lot now with some of the clinical development partners and more again in the value and evidence generation. So I think just understanding more of the processes that you then would be involved in and kind of your end goal role, I think that's super helpful. That's kind of what comes to mind.
Great. Yeah. And, many aspiring MSLs, whether they're, current students or people who have been, out in the working environment, whether that's as like a clinical pharmacist or as a community pharmacist, a lot of people ask me, like, do I need a fellowship to get into industry? Do I need, like, what sort of training do I need to really be able to stand apart to get an MSL role? And so speaking from the perspective of like a student who's trying to make the decision, who do you think benefits most from taking the route of the fellowship? Like, do you think students benefit more? Because, I guess I could speak from my perspective. I actually did a residency and then went back and did a fellowship. And I thought it was like a great experience to be able to draw upon my clinical background and my like therapeutic niche and then kind of utilize those, clinical skills in my, or not utilize them, but like draw upon them in my fellowship. So I definitely think that there was some benefit in doing like kind of one versus the other, but I wasn't directly like out of school. And so, yeah, I would love to get your perspective on, aspiring MSLs who are considering a fellowship. Why should someone consider it? And perhaps why should someone not consider it?
Yeah. So when you first asked the question, I think what comes to mind is that they're really designed for early career. So I think the type of learning experience that it is, it does bode well for someone that's recently out of school, just graduating, or in your case, had done another experience. But earlier career, I think, is kind of what stands out the most. I think definitely someone that's willing to maybe take a step back in, like, if they are already in the workforce, and just really be willing to jump into different projects and have more of a rotational experience versus kind of one straight path. I think it's definitely someone that has been motivated throughout pharmacy school, has already like networked in the industry. I think that's super helpful in getting a fellowship. Even if it's not a direct connection, I think those are the skills that can be really foundational, especially for MSL roles. Someone that's just willing to be a learner, be a sponge, just kind of take a year or 2 years and really learn a lot. But they're great programs. I don't think you would ever need to do a fellowship or need to do anything to get somewhere in your career. I think there are a lot of paths, especially to the MSL role, but very valuable experiences. I think you can do a lot to learn more about them, and if it would then be kind of the right consideration.
What are also, and on that note, what are some of the key skills that you feel like you developed in your fellowship experience that were either like surprising to you or something that maybe wasn't necessarily a part of the job description, but you've now found to be super helpful in your current job?
The number one skill is definitely communication. I think that's something that you have to leverage on the interviews, but I think it's something that I continue to develop throughout my fellowship program. And hopefully now today I'm still continuing to develop those skills. I think it would be like asking questions and not afraid to kind of seek out help from others and finding different resources, just taking advantage of that. I think the whole environment is, especially at my company, just very friendly and open. So I think it was kind of a shift from pharmacy school where it's like not as maybe project based, but now you're really focusing on developing relationships with team members. That's an interesting one.
Definitely. And how do you approach scientific exchange with key opinion leaders, like in the context of communication? Because I was going to ask, about communication style and everything. You kind of hit on that a little bit already, but would love to hear, especially KOLs are so busy. And so to be able to nail one down even for 10, 15 minutes, like how do you approach those conversations on the scientific exchange to ensure that you're best utilizing your time, but also the KOL's time?
Yes, that's exactly it. You definitely want to make sure that you're making the most of your time and theirs. Everyone's time is valuable, and I think that will then strengthen your relationship if you're able to continue to meet with them. So during my fellowship, I learned a lot about the scientific engagement model. So that would be everything from pre-call planning through to entering your insights, and just taking a very strategic approach of setting yourself up for what questions you're hoping to ask, what is the objective of your meeting. And I think it helps so much when you're going into any type of interaction, whether it's, presenting data to them or kind of an intro meeting, that you know what you're hoping to get out of it. And I think I always take the time to refresh myself on our medical objectives, our listening imperatives, and aligning the HCP skill set with some of those specific questions that I might be able to help. And something I've learned since entering the field has really been how to guide an interaction to elicit kind of those key insights and that are relevant for your strategy. So that's a big one. I think the listening skills are also something you hear a lot about as being important for an MSL, but they really are. And making sure that you're giving them the space and also actively listening. And there are times when you're not going to be able to stick directly to your objectives and the exact agenda that you laid out, but really being there to listen to their needs and concerns at that time if they are bringing something up. And yeah, I think then really just taking the time to look at your notes, reflect on that, understanding what insights you might have gleaned from it. I think the whole model really is helpful, and then guiding any interactions in my communication style in the field.
Oh my gosh, I have so many follow-up questions. So I'm wondering, you mentioned taking notes. So everyone has their own strategy of taking notes. Like, do you take notes during the interaction? Is it quickly after? Like, okay, great, nice to see you. And then you go off and kind of write the notes and insights right after. What's your strategy as it pertains to notes?
Yes, I also have heard a number of different strategies from team members, and I think it's so interesting. I usually have a physical notebook out and a pen, and I'll usually ask them if they're okay with me taking notes just to make sure. And I have it there to jot down some key things, but I'm definitely not writing down everything they're saying. And then if I even get to taking down some quick notes, I feel like the priority is being present. Once I leave, I definitely try to fill in any gaps, either on the paper, in a quick voice recording to myself, or typing up some notes just super quick on my phone. Time is of the essence. I feel like I've done the opposite, or I've had to rush off to another meeting, and you definitely lose a lot when it's not present right afterwards. So I think that's something I've learned. And then I also like to take a step back and just think about some of the notes and some of the insights that might be coming up from it, but I feel like it's not the immediate next step for me. I like to kind of ponder those a little bit more.
Definitely. And then what about when you're talking to a KOL and you're the scientific expert representing the company, but you might not know the answer to a question? How do you generally approach that?
I mean, the number one thing is to be honest and not try to say anything that you're not completely sure about. I would never want to misrepresent the science, the data, anything like that. So I think it can also help build rapport if you are just honest and upfront and say, that's a really interesting question, or I'm not sure exactly about that subpopulation. Be more than happy to take a look at this and get back to you as soon as I have the information. So yeah, that's a big skill for MSLs. You do all of this training, it's months long, but you're not going to know every possible question that can come up in the field. So I think pharmacy school also does a really good job of training you to take a step back, know how to look up the information that you need, even if you don't have it right on site.
Definitely. And I'd love to go back a little bit, we've talked a lot about like the MSL role and everything. Would love to go back a little bit to the actual fellowship interview process. So like hard pivot, because I do think a lot of people who are looking into this process are very interested in it. They've maybe heard a lot of the lore and all of the like kind of myths or like truths around it. So what was your strategy going into the fellowship interview process? Like how did it go, like pre-mid-year, at mid-year? From when I did it, that was quite a few years ago. So I'd love to hear a bit of like an updated, version of like how it goes and what your strategy was going into the entire process.
Yes, it's a lot. And I think it's important for students as they're preparing for the interview cycle to know that is going to be super busy. It's going to be a lot. It's nice because you're getting practice in all of the interviews you're doing that are making you better and better for the next. So I feel like each candidate I've talked to, you can see them develop over time. You can feel yourself having the skills develop. So that's a great feature. But my strategy going in was a lot of what you continue to hear, but really nailing down the situational questions using the STAR method. I think that's critical, being concise and being able to tell the story. From being on the other side, I can definitely tell when the candidates have practiced that, and it goes a long way to have different unique examples that you can pull from your pharmacy experience or anything like that. I think that's super impressive when I'm then on the other side. So yeah, I feel like you can't practice enough. I was fortunate to go through interviews with a close friend, and we were calling each other almost nightly and practicing our answers. But I think also it's a cliche, but it is time to get to know the company as well. And for me, it was really valuable with a 1-year program to pick a company that might be able to have opportunities at the end of it, or just in an ideal world, one that I would see myself working for. So really getting to know the company culture, getting to know the different team members, asking key questions that you have, not just to fill time at the end of interviews. It's intimidating, but I think it can be a really productive learning experience. And we also, in a lot of my fellowship interviews, had a presentation component because a lot were geared toward the MSL role. So that's just great to just reinforce your skills and also leverage very relevant skills for the MSL role of kind of showing what you would be capable of.
Yes, definitely. And I would second that, it really is a two-way interview process, that it's just as much as they're getting to know you and evaluate the pool of applicants, which oftentimes there are a lot of qualified applicants. So I always tell students, like, don't get discouraged if you don't get to the second or third or fourth round with every single company or with a lot of the companies, because there's like, from being on the other side as well with evaluating the MSL fellow applicants, that's like there's oftentimes like people who are really, really great candidates and they likely are, doing well in a lot of their interviews. And then there are other people who haven't prepared as much. And so it seems like, oh my God, so many people are interviewing and all of this, but you have to ensure that, like, from a culture perspective, that like you are going into a culture that fits what you're looking for. I mean, some companies, I'm of course not going to name names, but there are some companies that are super formal and you can see by the way they ask questions, by the way they conduct themselves. And then other companies that are super informal and they all still get their stuff done. They all still are, achieving everything they would like in their career, but the approach is different. Sometimes that comes down to like where the company is, headquartered. Sometimes, companies that are European or Japanese or American, like kind of just function differently. And so figuring out, like, as a student or someone approaching the fellowship process, like, do I like this culture? Does this work with me? And then the other way around too, because maybe you're like comporting yourself in a certain way. And then the company is like, oh, but we conduct ourselves in this way. And so it's all about the right fit. And genuinely, until I went through the fellowship process, I did not believe that statement at all. I was like, oh, people just say that just so, feelings aren't hurt and things like that. But it really is about fit.
I agree. And I think there's a lot of research you can do beforehand. There's then, of course, a lot that you can gain from being on an interview with them. But like you said, considering the location, the headquarters where the company is based and affiliated, that drives a lot of culture, the size of the company, and the team size that you'd be working on, that dictates a lot of how they operate, maybe how formal and maybe more rigid some teams are versus more flexible and fluid others are. I also did not want to forget to highlight that I did a lot of research on the MSL role, medical affairs, industry, all of that to make up for experiences that I was lacking. And I think that can be intimidating now for students if they're going into fellowship interviews without pages of industry experience, now that there are a lot more opportunities for students, which is fantastic, but they might not always be available to you at your school or with your schedule over the summer, things like that. But I think candidates that take the time to research the industry, have a really strong understanding going into interviews, that speaks volumes, especially if you have gone out of your way to gain that in other ways.
Yes, I fully agree with that. I know people who have had zero, like industry experience, but because they put in the time, effort, and energy, and maybe even did informational interviews to like fully understand like what these industry roles are like, evaluating the different functional areas, and really getting to know so much more about what their, day-to-day would look like as a fellow or even afterwards in industry really did speak volumes. I agree, because there are some people who have tons of industry experience, but if you're not able to articulate that or demonstrate that in an interview, it's, almost all for naught, because you need to be able to have that experience and talk about it. And if you don't have the experience, be able to articulate that you understand what the job is. Like going into MSL interviews, probably you can echo the same sentiment. It's like when you go into the interviews, like one of the first questions they ask is like, so what do you know about this role, or what do you know about medical affairs? And you have to have a great answer to that. And some people who did a medical affairs or clinical development or HEOR internship like can't even really articulate that well. So it's about preparation and about your familiarity with the role.
Absolutely. Yes.
Amazing. So I'd love to ask a little bit about I know people probably ask you like your typical day in the life, but I'd love to ask you more about like your typical week in the life, perhaps, because I know every day is quite different, but would love to hear, because, something that people don't talk about often enough is that, MSLs, even though they function within a corporate environment, they have a lot of, power over their schedule. And so they're oftentimes determining, okay, is today an admin day? Is today a day that I want to go out in the field and have XYZ meetings? Am I actually hopping on a flight, depending on my region, to, establish these, relationships or continue to nurture these relationships in this particular part of the country? So I would love to hear, what your typical week is like in your role.
Definitely. I think you hit on a lot of it there. The bulk of my time throughout the week is going to be spent on field-facing activities, given the scope of the role. So it is important to note that's not just meeting with HCPs and sitting down and having meetings for 3 days a week, but a lot of preparation that goes into all of that, whether it's the outreach to the KOLs, kind of setting up time with them. I definitely prioritize in-person interactions. I really prefer them for developing relationships and find them a lot more valuable for both sides. So in my territory, that does look like a lot of advanced planning and coordination, because nearly everything is hopping on a flight. So maybe it would be a day conference or one key meeting that I secure in a city. And then working to map around that other interactions that I'm hoping to get. So a lot of outreach, a lot of pre-call planning, also really taking the time to make sure you're familiar with the science. I feel like you get trained up on it, but you are constantly refreshing yourself on it, doing advanced training, learning about new literature updates, the competitor landscape. There isn't a lot of ongoing learning as well. We have a few calls weekly, as I imagine most teams would, of team call, different trainings, journal clubs, insight calls, things like that. So it would be a balance of that, those meetings, some of the admin stuff that you mentioned, all throughout the week. And then, I kind of try to always be looking out a few months, just again, based on my territory and kind of figuring out what city I'd like to be in, if there is certain things happening there that I'd like to prioritize, and mapping the rest of my schedule around that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, from someone that's hearing that, they might be like, oh my gosh, that sounds so busy. So I would love to hear how, I don't love the word balance, but like how you find like that work-life integration with like that much travel and also preparation and also having, fruitful visits with the HCPs.
It's a balance, and it's definitely something that I feel like you continue to learn and improve at as you develop as an MSL. I think there's definitely busy periods and maybe slower periods in the MSL role. So just kind of riding both of those. I know you're probably no stranger to like spring and fall conference seasons where everything really picks up. So I feel like the times around that are getting yourself extra prepared and extra organized and set up for things like that. But then once you're in it, just taking it day by day, staying organized, making sure you're prioritized on the most important tasks, meetings, all of that. I think there's so much support that comes from your manager, your team members, the medical unit, in helping to guide like the strategy and what's most important and helping to prioritize, which really lends itself to staying balanced and making sure that you're focused on the priorities. But our team also values like time together at conferences. It's not just going to be constant meetings and sessions, but getting together as a team, developing those relationships with each other. That really helps maintain some of the balance too.
Definitely. Yeah. And so in your time as an MSL, especially transitioning from being a fellow to now being an MSL and senior MSL, what are 3 things or 3 words like you would describe to, someone who maybe doesn't know, as much about like becoming an MSL? Like what really defines a successful MSL in the field? Like what are like the 3 key things that they're either really great at or 3, character traits that they might have?
I feel like I probably don't have too many unique thoughts here, but I would say communication, that has to be the number one. You are communicating key scientific information in a concise way to the HCPs to help with their patient care, their understanding. So that really has to be on point. That's something that I'm constantly working on. I think the strategic thinking piece is key. You really are out there trying to gather information as well, and you want to make sure that it's relevant information to your company, to your medical strategy. And then also being able to, in the interactions, be listening for certain things that you might want to go deeper on. I think that's something that has clearly developed to me as I've been in this role, is over time, learning what areas you want to ask follow-up questions, getting to a deeper root of their understanding, what they're saying about something, to really uncover the truth. So that's been a key one, strategic thinking. And then I'd probably have to say something about organization. I think you have to be able to stay organized on the different HCPs in your territory, your different priorities. I work across a few therapeutic areas that are related, but definitely staying organized on all of the different things that come with each therapeutic area. I think that's key. And I will notice in myself, if I don't have like clearly documented notes from my last interaction, it doesn't bode as well for the future interaction. So I try and stay really organized on keeping notes from each HCP visit. So really hitting the ground running through the next one. And very often can comment if you remember certain things. That's super helpful in developing rapport, building the relationship.
Yeah, it's the whole like dynamic between EQ and IQ. So it's like maybe some of the notes are actually about like the HCP's daughter who, recently had an awesome ballet recital, but then you're also putting notes about like, oh, but they also, are an OBGYN and this HCP is, having issues with XYZ. And so you're putting like all of that information like in the same list for sure. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. And if you are in a meeting and like we talked about earlier, you have information that you want to follow up, you really need to make sure that you're following up on anything that you said. I think that goes a long way. Staying organized on any of those follow-up items.
Definitely. And I want to hit on something that you brought up probably like in the first question that I asked. But, when you said, yes, I did a fellowship and then, I was looking for my first role in being an MSL, and you said you were open to moving to a new region. And I don't really hear a lot of people talking about that. I do think it's key. And a lot of the clients that we work with in the MSL Academy like to gear up, the right people to get into the MSL role. We bring that up often. Like, would you be willing to move? Is that something you're interested in? Because there are certain regions that, might need certain, or might have certain needs rather, that are not being met. Particularly as teams are growing. And so it is something that I love that you mentioned, and I'd love to hear a little bit about like what that transition was like. Were you always open to moving somewhere new? And this is like coming from someone who like loves moving. Like, I grew up in New Jersey. I went to college in the Midwest. Then I moved to the South for pharmacy school. I did my residency in LA on the West Coast. So like, I love moving. So this is like, I'm not the audience for this question, but I would love to, hear your perspective on moving to a new region, maybe where you don't know anyone for a job.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to it. I would not say that it was part of my plan, but I feel like I never considered the opportunity until it was kind of right there, and I thought it would like be a fantastic experience to start my career. I feel like there were so many factors. So I, at the end of my fellowship, was really prioritizing staying on with this team. So I think that's something to consider. Where is the opportunity right? I think it helped that although I was moving quite far, I was staying with the same team, same company. There were a lot of constants in that change. So that was super helpful. I was stepping into a territory that had a fantastic MSL beforehand. So a lot of great relationships to draw from. I was even able to have her still on board during my transition time because she was in just a different role within our company. So that was huge. It was scary kind of stepping into a space where you don't just off the cusp know key institutions. Like, you'll obviously know the big academic medical centers, but there's still a lot more to learn about just the regional differences in different health systems, the way that they're run, maybe how open to industry they are, the type of patients that they're treating. That I really drew upon other MSLs at my company in this territory. So my company prioritized, getting to know each other across teams that are in the same region. And I feel like that was super valuable as I was starting out and making the transition. So yeah, I encourage everyone. I also love my territory now. It makes so much of the travel fun, traveling to new spaces. But yeah, it's definitely something that you have to consider. I had, not as many obligations. I was just moving myself across the country. So that was helpful. And I also had a family member, my older brother, already out here. So that helped ease the transition, like personal, getting to know people. But yeah, it's been great.
Okay, amazing. So, what final parting, piece of advice do you have for our audience of primarily aspiring MSLs and students who are interested in this career path? What would you say to them?
I think it's a fantastic role. I think you hear a lot about it for a reason. So I would continue to encourage them to learn more about it, see if it fits their skill set and something that they could really be passionate about. I think listening to podcasts like this, consuming a lot of other resources that are now available to students and aspiring MSLs is such a fantastic thing to take advantage of. There's a lot of content that you can consume, a lot of information that you can get. You can certainly be reaching out to a number of different people, starting to have those informational interviews. And I think a lot of the skills that aspiring MSLs inherently have to draw from are very transferable to the role. So in the same way that I'm reaching out to HCPs, trying to make connections, it might take more than one outreach. That kind of persistence and networking and putting yourself out there is just as what you're having to do for the MSL role, whether you're putting your name in for different roles and applications or just trying to network with others in the field. Yeah, I definitely would encourage you to be like a scientific learner. I think there is a lot of ongoing learning, and the more that you can do that as you're building out your resume, if there is a specific therapeutic area that you want to go into, that's really important, being on top of the science. And I think, as we talked about, there are so many routes to the MSL role, and there's a lot of background experiences that when you're on a team, you're drawing from other people's experiences. So I think definitely don't downplay any of your experiences that have led you here, and they can really be an asset to eventual MSL role.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your, your story and your insights from the role. Like, we really appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone's going to want to connect with you and learn a little bit more about what you're doing. So how can people reach out?
Yeah, probably LinkedIn is the best. Krysia Lesniak. That would be the best way to connect. So yeah, looking forward to meeting new people.
Amazing. Yeah, that's so great. Well, thank you so much again, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.